This is Spotlight Omaha. Spotlight Omaha is a local podcast that highlights local businesses and influential movers and shakers in the Omaha business community. Spotlight Omaha is brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. Now, from the Pyramid Contractor Studios, the host of Spotlight Omaha, Jimmy Allen.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome inside the Spotlight Omaha podcast, where we take you around the city of Omaha, introduce you to local business owners, influential figures, and people who are making an impact on our community. We are brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. If your company's not showing up at the top of Google searches, maybe you don't have an existing social media presence, pixelfiremarketing.com is here to help. Check out pixelfiremarketing.com for more details today. Joining us inside the Pyramid Contractor Studios, Gary Sharp with 1620 The Zone. Gary, thanks for being here.
Wayne's World. That's all I can think about being in the studio. Thanks for having me.
I'll get you a hat. I have a Wayne's World hat I can give to you.
I bet you did.
You've been doing radio and broadcasting for a long time. How did you get your start in radio?
Actually in Lincoln. So when I went to Nebraska, the second day I was in Lincoln ever, as a student, I went to Broadcast House, which is at 44th and O in Lincoln.
Is it still there?
It is still there.
Okay.
It is part of the company that I currently work for. So the only two radio companies in Nebraska I've ever worked for are NRG Media.
Okay.
Now at the time they were not NRG Media; they were owned by a family, the Warners. So I walked in the door and I said, "Hey, I want to be a sports broadcaster. I'm a journalism major, hopefully, and I want to do this, and I want to work at a radio station." And the next thing you know, I'm working 6 to noon on Sundays, babysitting a B107.3, and the following year, and at the time, Jim Rose was working at KLIN.
Was he the official voice of the Huskers yet?
No, we had not gotten the Huskers yet. That was coming in the next year. And so Jim Rose, Gary Sharp, and John Baylor were all working under the same roof in 1994. And John and I would work weekends. He would babysit KLIN. I'd babysit B107.3. And then as we got the Huskers, we also got the Lincoln Stars, the USHL hockey team. And we all kind of took on roles. John became the voice of Nebraska volleyball. I started doing pregame, postgame, sidelines. Jim eventually moved into 5 years later doing the voice of the Huskers. So that's how I got my start in Lincoln. So Broadcast House is very special to me.
When you come to Lincoln, you go to school in Lincoln, was the thought always to be affiliated with Nebraska athletics to some degree?
No, I just kind of got lucky because I didn't know that KLIN was pursuing the rights.
Sure.
Because they had been forever at KFOR, and they got the rights when I was there, and it just happened, I was going to be involved with doing the Huskers.
You got the chance to work with the Husker stuff and working under Steve Peterson and Jim Rose and those guys.
How'd we jump from Steve Peterson and Jim Rose?
Yeah, well, all at the same time. I mean, people that are synonymous with Nebraska athletics.
So I didn't work very long under Steve Peterson. Bill Byrne is the one that I think Bill Byrne is the best athletic director Nebraska's ever had.
I think most people would agree.
And Troy Dannon has a lot of Bill Byrne qualities in him, the way he deals with people and the way he handles situations and kind of flies under the radar. So Bill was the guy that kind of I got to know the most. And then when Bill left, which he told me before we went on the air and did his last radio show, because Bill did a weekly radio show back then. That's how the athletic director show on the network started, because Bill Byrne wanted a show so that he could get to know everybody and everybody could get to know him, and he could answer all these questions that would come flooding into his office during the week. And so he just went on the air. And so we did an hour, and he was fantastic. He's one of my favorite people of all in athletics. And
thoughts on Steve Peterson?
Well, we're getting there. So he told me before his final show, because we always did it at 6:00 on Tuesday nights. He said, "Hey, I have to tell you something. I'm leaving." And I was crushed because Bill was our guy.
Yeah.
Like Bill answered any question we wanted. He gave us access. He was a friend. And he said, "I'm leaving to go to Texas A&M." So, the first of what would be two athletic directors that went to Texas A&M. And I was like, oh no. And then a couple of days later, it got officially announced, and in comes Steve Peterson, and we didn't do the same kind of radio show. And after a while, I wasn't doing any of the radio.
Is it frustrating for you to come in and walk into a place with structure like that is helping you with your career to some degree, with the friendship and the openness and the ability to have access to the program, and then just watch it fall into the disarray that it that it has over the last 20 years? Is that frustrating?
Well, I think there have been bits and pieces where it reminds you of the past. I think under Bill's tutelage and the coaches that were there that we specifically dealt with, there was access. People were not on edge. They didn't think you were trying to get something.
Sure.
So you became friends and you got to know them and their families, and they got to know you, and it felt like a genuine relationship. And that's more of when it felt like it was mom and pop. But it was transitioning under Bill, because it went from Devaney, who ran it as a mom and pop shop, to this is a Fortune 500 company. And I think as we got past Bill and some other athletic directors, it was treated differently. So maybe that relationship with the media and people that do the games changed a little bit.
It became big business.
Yeah. And it is a Fortune 500 company. I mean, Nebraska football, Nebraska athletics is a Fortune 500 company in a state that doesn't have a ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the one where most people pay attention to. So I think it's the relationships changed a little bit, but I think you see that in college athletics as you've got more separation, and you don't have the, hey, we're friends or we get to know each other as much as you had in the past.
Does it feel like it's kind of getting that feeling back in Lincoln, though? Like, it feels like Troy Dannon is very much that guy. Matt Rule is very much that guy.
Yeah, because I don't think the people that you deal with put you on edge.
Sure.
Okay, you don't have to feel like you're walking around eggshells. They're normal people.
Keith Mann does a great job with that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's not necessarily we want more access. It's, when you have access, what do you do with it?
Right.
Do you ask good questions? Do you get to know somebody? Do you put them on edge that they always think that you're searching for something? They always want something. And I think also you have two people, and the head football coach and the athletic director are normal people. Okay. Yeah,
point.
They have these big titles and they have an immense amount of pressure, but they're normal people that if you treat them like normal people, you'll realize they're like you and I. They just have a different job, but their goal at the end of the day is the same.
First time I was in Lincoln for one of Matt Rule's press conferences, I asked a question and told me it was a good question and acknowledged me, stopped me on the way out the door, asked me who I was, and thanked me for coming. I can't imagine too many other football coaches prior to him actually did that for me. And there's no reason to. He didn't know me, didn't have any idea who I was. He knew who I worked for, but it's just incredible to me. Some of the personalities we've seen come through that room, and the guy that's there now is the one that seems to get it maybe more than anybody.
Don't you think if you like doing what you're doing, you probably have a different feel, and you're not always on edge. You're not always like, okay, what's next? You're like, I have a great job,
and you're doing the job.
Yeah. And I think that goes a long way. And I think that's the one thing that resonates with Rule and the fan base before they start breaking through is he generally likes being here.
Yeah.
He likes being the football coach at Nebraska. And I think if you go back to Scott wanted to be the football coach at Nebraska, but he never embraced it.
Yeah.
And it's always like it was an obligation. I think Matt Rule looks at it as a privilege. And, Frank Solich looked at it like that. Tom Osborne, of course, looked at it like that. The coaches in between probably, yes, for a certain extent, but not fully. But back to Matt Rule and him engaging with you, he's just a normal person.
Yeah. That's a person-to-person interaction.
I think we get in the media, we treat people like they're something they're not.
Yeah.
And if we treat somebody normal and not bow down to them and just act normal around them and ask good questions, you're going to get good answers. And you know what? You'll get a good response.
One of my favorite bits in all of Nebraska athletics right now is how much Matt Rule lights up when he points out that Tommy Frazier's in attendance at things. It cracks me up. I want to go back to you for a minute. You talked about babysitting radio stations, but in all of your endeavors, you've been in some sort of management or directing of some sort. Why is it a big deal for you to not only be able to be an on-air personality, entertain people, but also help make sure things are heading in the right direction behind the scenes?
Because it makes my life easier.
Fair enough. Sure.
Do
you enjoy that aspect of it though?
Yeah. Like when I was younger, I loved chaos. I loved chaos.
Like 4 days ago. Yeah.
Create chaos and jump into chaos. And I think as you get older, you want less chaos, because I also think one thing, and as I've gotten older and been in this business a long time, and I think other people that are in this market that are in my role, and we've been in the business for 20 plus years,
Mhm.
is there were people along the way that helped me. So I've kind of, the latter part of my career, have gone about helping other people. And you work with us, and you're in the same boat of what you do with your program, is you're trying to help people that are getting into the business.
Yeah.
Because that was you one time.
Absolutely.
And if they take your job, great. That's fantastic. You've done your job. But I think it's important, instead of having the choppy waters, to have something smooth, so you don't have to worry about that stuff. So you can just come in and do your job, and you don't have all this other outside noise that is causing issues.
We're catching up with Gary Sharp, 1620 The Zone, here on the Spotlight Omaha podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing and Pyramid Contractors. Maybe that answers my next question.
Drapes, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
We're actually looking at getting them replaced. You also do some teaching as well. You do some classes at UNO. How did that come about, and why do you enjoy that so much?
I do some high school, and I get the opportunity to go speak at college. I just think people I've met that are instructors that listen to the show or listen to my work, and they want me to come in and tell the story. I think one thing that happens when we deal with young people is we don't tell them the truth. There are people that think, hey, you're going to jump into our world of radio.
Yeah.
And we both know this. Hey, you're going to make a lot of money. No, you're not.
Yeah.
And I think we are in a medium where if you're in it for the money, you're probably in it for the wrong reason.
Right.
Now, if you're successful, down the road, it's probably going to come. But to initially say, I'm going to make all this money because I'm on TV and I'm on radio and doing podcasts, that's not true. And so part of the reason why I like speaking to young people and telling them about my story and then telling them about the industry
set expectations
is there's, I'm in it.
Yeah.
I think there are some really good J schools, whether they be high school or they be college around here, that they have people that are teaching that either are currently in the business or just have gotten out of the business, so they can tell you real life. They're not going to blow smoke.
Right.
They're going to tell you what to expect, how to get there. It's not going to be easy. You're not going to make a lot of money. You're going to probably be a little transient. Not everybody starts in Lincoln and Omaha. You might have to go to Shadron, but boy, that's a great radio station. It's going to benefit your career. So that's why I like talking to young people. And also they keep me young, and I was in those seats when somebody came to my high school or somebody came to when I was in college and spoke to us about what they do for a living and why they love it so much.
So how much do you make at 16? No, I'm just kidding. I want to talk about your dad. He's anybody that listens to your yeah. I want to talk about Walt Sharp for a second.
Walt down in Boca Raton will watch this.
Walt, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a comment on YouTube. We'll read it out loud. Anytime you bring up your passion for baseball, your dad kind of just automatically jumps into the conversation. You talked about how important it was when people came and talked to you at high school or college or wherever. How important has Walt Sharp been in what you decided to do for a living?
Probably not the radio part of it.
Sure.
But my love for sports. So my dad, a little background, New York City guy, moved to the Midwest, met my mom. But he worked for over 30 years for the New York Mets. He was a regional scout and then kind of worked his way up. And so my whole life was spent around baseball. Now, Dad wasn't home very much.
Sure.
So I'm not going to say that my dad is the greatest dad, but I learned a lot from him by his loyalty and his hard work and getting the job done and having a passion for something that you believe in.
Yeah.
And so baseball was big in our family. I mean, we're a baseball family. And because of what my dad did for a living, that afforded me a lot of opportunities as someone that was young to meet a lot of people in baseball, to meet players, to go on trips, to go to every park, to go see games that I had no business being at. So I, that part is influenced by my dad. And then some of the lessons you learn along the way. He did not have an easy job. When you say a professional baseball scout, everybody thinks it's glamorous. Well,
but he worked for the Mets.
He does have a World Series ring. But when it's 42 degrees and you're in Ames, Iowa,
sure,
and you'd rather be somewhere else, that isn't the most glamorous thing.
You're not making Matt Campbell money.
No. You're watching Bobby Randall coach the Iowa State Cyclones.
How much? Let me ask you this question: who was the greatest baseball player you ever saw live? Because you've done the CWS, you've been at minor.
God, that's a tough one. Because I've been lucky enough to see a lot of great players. Probably the Barry Bonds with the Pittsburgh Pirates, not the Barry Bonds with San Francisco.
Pre the Roids era.
He was an
allegedly
incredible athlete of everything that he could do in left field and at the plate.
You umpired as well.
Yeah. Yes, I did.
Is it as much of an experience as people would think it would be as with dealing with people?
So I think people should do two things in life.
Work at the DMV and be an official.
You should laugh every day. You should cry. You should think. Thank you, Jimmy V. Pulling tarp.
Okay.
In a ballpark, and then officiating.
Yeah, there's a reason you have 16 people helping you pull that tarp. It's not exactly easy.
Yeah, but sometimes when you work in the Florida State League and it's rainy season and you do it like 4 times a day, it's not the easiest thing. I do think that people would have a better understanding about the umpires and the officials if one time you do it. You put on the gear and you go behind the plate, and I don't care what age it is, but always the younger kids, it seems like the worst parents, is that you experience that. You go and you ref a basketball game. But I did do umpiring because I like to be around the sport because I wasn't good enough to play the sport at a high level.
Sure.
But you learn a lot of things about yourself. And I think you learn a lot of things about responsibility. And just it helped me because I like to be a people person, as you know. And so I got to interact with players, coaches, fellow umpires. And I would continue to do it if I had time, because I was in college, I did basketball. So I was reffing high school basketball, just because it kept me in shape. But I also like being around people.
Yeah.
So I think and we're getting better, but we still have shortage of officials, men and women.
It's probably getting worse.
I think everyone one time should take the opportunity to learn the rules, which would help when they're watching their son or daughter play, and then officiate. And so you put yourself in the shoes of that man or woman that is out there that you're berating, and you're like, whoa, I've been there before. I understand their job.
I want to go back to something you just said a minute ago. You said you're a people person. I think anybody that's ever had a 3-second conversation with you can agree with it. I've seen you sit there and do a radio show while playing catch with an 8-year-old at the Omaha Baseball Village.
Yes.
Now
will be pitching in the regional in Baton Rouge this weekend.
Good luck. I've told the story several times, but one time I did a show with Michael Severe at the College World Series, and we just happened to park next to each other when we showed up at the same exact time. And I watched Michael get stopped by like 16 different people on the way up. And he stopped at every interaction and had a conversation. I've seen you do the same thing. Where does that enjoyment of people come from for you? I
don't think we'd be in this business if we didn't like people.
Fair.
Now, sometimes you don't like being around a lot of people, but I think you have to enjoy people. And I'm not going to say it's an obligation. I think it's a privilege that people spend their time listening to you, consuming your content, and that they're willing to come up and introduce themselves, whether good or bad, because not every interaction is great. There are some people that have strong opinions, and when they meet you, maybe their opinion of you changes
because they're a Cardinals fan.
Simple interaction, but everything goes back, Jimmy. A lot of the stuff that I experienced, I was very lucky enough with my parents and what they did for a living, to meet a lot of people that were older that had important jobs, whether they be an Urbandale police officer, whether they be the governor of Iowa. And so I think those people taking time to talk to me when I was a little kid, trying to decide what I was going to do for a living. But let's be honest, I always wanted to be a broadcaster. I think that's always been instilled in me. And so I think it's important to talk to people. And I love talking to people. I've never met a stranger.
We spent time talking about your time in Lincoln. Let's jump forward to when you get to Omaha. A lot of changes are happening at 1620 Zone. Matt Schick is on his way out the door. You did like 14 shows with Jason Peter at one point.
To be fair, 27.
Okay, yeah, give or take, carry the one. But there was a lot of changes. And you kind of helped usher in that era of what 1620 The Zone is now. The 6A to 8P extension. But you've always seemed to deal well in chaos. Why are you so good at dealing with moving parts?
Here. Yeah. I mean, what Neil Nelkin did with the idea of 1620 and then hiring Kevin Kugler and then pairing him with Bob Bruce, which, that got 1620 off the ground. And then of course, Michael comes in, and then you got Matt Schick and Nick Baugh. An incredible start, but you are right about the transition. So a story that I don't think I've told before, when I got approached, because Neil Nelkin called me out of the blue. I was working for the Fort Myers Miracle down in Fort Myers, Florida. Actually had come in from polling tarp, and our secretary said, "Hey, do you know a Neil Nelkin?" And I was like, "Why would he be calling me?" And she gave me the message. And so I called Neil back, and he said, "Hey, you ever have a desire to move back to Omaha and get back in radio. And I was like, I really haven't thought about it because I was working for the Twins. I had a great job. I was also doing radio on the side.
But you just got done pulling a tarp?
I got done pulling a tarp. We were in the middle of an 8-game homestand. This is a true story. And I was like, yeah, I might be interested. And he said, well, we're going to have an opening. We're creating a morning show. There's already a host, but I can't tell you who it is. Would you be interested? And I said, I would listen. So as the process went along, and they never told me that Jason Peter was going to be my co-host until a couple of days before I signed the contract.
Because they weren't sure, right?
Well, they were kind of sure.
Okay.
It was Andy Ruback, former general manager. He loved Jason. He saw a future in Jason. And so while I was going through this process, I was picking the brain of people that were working at 1620 at the time. And so Matt Schick and I knew each other from Matt's time in Kearney, and then we kind of were passing when he's worked at KTV. And so I called him and he said, hey, he told me everything that was going on. And he said, hey, I got to tell you, I'm leaving. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I got a job at ESPN. So I'm moving to Bristol. And I was like, whoa, so you're leaving because they were going to have unsportsmanlike conduct with Michael and Matt. And so I knew before he had told anybody that he was leaving because he was honest with me. And so, things moved along. I really liked the setup, the conversation, and eventually ended up here. And, but it was transition because Kevin had basically retired from full-time radio so he could go into, full-time play-by-play.
I hope that works out for him.
I think it might. We'll see. This is a big year. But, Kevin is the face and the voice of 1620 still to this day. And so you lose a staple like that and a show that is a juggernaut and is the OG of 1620. You're like, oh my God, what's going on? And then you're adding me, who fortunately some people still remember me from my time in Lincoln. And then here's Jason Peter. And then, what are they going to do with, Nick Baugh? They got no room for him. So yeah, it was a heck of a transition that was choppy for a while. And then, we ended up with Sharp and Benning in the morning.
Well, and the transition doesn't stop there. You moved to the midday for a while. Give a shout out to George Norwood, who likes and comments from time to time. He's probably watching right now.
Fantastic. A+ human being.
I would grade him higher if I'm being honest. You move back to the mornings. Damon leaves, Damon comes back, Damon leaves, Damon comes back, Damon leaves. Move on to Nick.
All of that happened.
Yeah. Now you're with Matt McMaster. But again, back to the original question, dealing with chaos. What is it easy for you? Is it as simple as I sit down, there's a microphone, there's 4 hours, there's people listening? Or is there an adjustment behind the scenes people don't see from you fluctuating that much or 6 years and kind of going to and from and doing everything between?
Everything is chemistry. So
sure.
I think that's the one thing I always appreciate about Damon. One, we didn't know each other before we started.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And here you got a white guy and a black guy. Okay. That both are kind of stubborn.
And somehow people confused you for Damon Benning one time.
I did play. I wore number 21. Thank you for everybody. We had a great run.
Yeah.
Love that mid-90s. We were not supposed to work.
Yeah.
Because we were completely different.
Sure.
And Damon had never done daily radio. And so all of a sudden.
He was a caller, right? Wasn't that kind of how it happened?
And then he would fill in.
Yeah.
He would do his segment. So we weren't supposed to work. And they were like, I don't know. And I'm like, people. I just came from Jason Peter.
Yeah,
okay?
I'll take
We're
anybody.
going to make this work. So, doing it with Damon, which, is one of the greatest time in my radio career.
You could hear it too.
Well, we had great chemistry.
Yeah.
And we both knew what we were talking about. We had a passion for it. But we weren't supposed to work. Now, it didn't always work. I mean, we had, one time Damon threw his keys at me. Thankfully he missed. In the studio, there's still a chunk out of the wall that people always go, I wonder what happened there. Well, I can tell you what happened.
Yeah.
But my great respect for Damon, who I think is so talented. We kind of grew and it became that show. And then, life changes and you have different things that are going on. And, people come in and out and you're doing shows either by yourself or with somebody else. And I think it all comes down to chemistry. But at the end of the day, we're all in it because you are with John. You're in it to entertain.
Yeah.
Okay. You need to entertain and inform people and make people think and make people have emotions. And I think regardless of who you're sharing a mic with, if you're able to pull that off, you can work through chaos or whoever your partner is that day or not that day. And that's kind of how I've seen it work at 1620 with all the success. Would I love to have what John and Josh have in the afternoon, that stability, the same person? Definitely. But I know this business, it's transient.
Yeah.
A lot of this business is on wheels, and you have to adjust, and you hope the listeners follow along.
You've had to do a show with me before, so I think you can absolutely work with anybody.
One of the first shows I think you did, where you weren't on your show, I think we did together.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Filled on USC, and then I did.
Don't quit your day job.
And yeah, you said, "Why are you even here?" This is the Spotlight Omaha podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing and Pyramid Contractors. When we talk about sports talk in the early 2000s versus where it's grown to today, did you have the foresight? Could you see it when you come into Omaha? And like you mentioned, 1620 The Zone wasn't even really that established of a thing yet. Podcasting was non-existent. Could you have imagined that it grew to where it is today?
No, but it has transitioned because you added the word podcast. So
sure.
One of the first things I did when I was in Lincoln, I was on Sports Nightly, or back then it was called Sports Day Mid-America. And so I was a regular host on there. So we had Jim Rose, John Bishop, Gary Sharp, and John Baylor all worked at the same place. It was incredible sports staff that I don't think will be replicated with the amount of talent that was in one building. But we were doing sports talk before 1620 came about.
Right.
And we were doing networks. So we were all over the state, and there was really no sports talk anywhere else. So we were the show. And so, you didn't have the access to the internet, and then there was not social media. So your news, either you waited for the following morning to pick up the World Herald or the Lincoln Journal-Star or the Lincoln Star, which was the afternoon paper, or you listened to Sports Day Mid-America. We had the coaches, we had all the information.
So then, you guys killed the newspaper.
We think we did. I believe that is written. So as we transition, then you saw 1620 came about. And Neil Nelkin had this great idea because Neil Nelkin at the time, at the tail end of his time in Lincoln, was at Broadcast House when we were starting to get the Huskers.
Yeah.
And then he moved to Omaha and he got the Huskers at NRG Media, or actually what at the time was Wait Media. But I kind of saw it once 1620 started and then became a juggernaut. And people were like, oh, sports talk is not just an East Coast thing. It's not just WFAN. It can work here. You saw more in Lincoln. You saw 590 back in the day at an afternoon show.
Are you allowed to talk about them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You know what? I know we're all in competition.
Right.
But the one thing I appreciate being in the Lincoln Omaha market is, for the most part, we all get along. There's rivalries and there's competition.
All right, who do you hate in sports media? Give us the
There's only one person,
sitting
and
here.
he doesn't work in the Omaha market.
Okay. You have to give me that off air.
But we, like once 1620 broke through, and that it's okay to have a daily sports talk show. Yeah. And by the way, shout out to the OGs of Randy Ecker and Gary Java, who were doing it on 1180 before 1620 became a thing. Everybody saw, hey, this can work here. And that you saw passion. I mean, this, you hear from your callers and your listeners. People to this day still love sports talk in Omaha.
Yep.
It still works. It's changed of what we do and where you get the sports talk. But I think we all saw in the early 2000s, this can work. And so it just started to grow. And now you have two stations in Lincoln. You have two stations in Omaha, really just one.
Yeah.
But it blew up. And I mean, it's amazing to where it's gone. But you think about it, Jimmy, most of the people that were here 15 years ago are still here on the air.
Yeah. Or doing something bigger.
Yeah. What Kevin and Matt have done, and in Nick Baugh as well. But they're either still hosting shows or they have their own show.
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive.
It's incredible that this keeps coming up, because one of my favorite things when I started doing this podcast was I couldn't wait to hear about cutthroat business talk and everybody's out for the dollar and nobody can work together. And this seems to be a unique thing to Omaha, is everybody has this thought process. There's enough work out there for everybody. You mentioned it, that everybody, there are other places to go and work, but it's not like they're the enemy. It's, hey, that's a spot one of my friends or somebody I care about could get work to.
And I think it's probably an Omaha and Nebraska thing.
I do too.
I think there's competition, and there always should be competition, and competition makes us better, the iron sharpen iron phrase. But I think, what, we, in this market, whether it be in radio or television or anything else you're doing in the other stuff that you do with marketing, I mean, we're all trying to fight for our bag, but at the end of the day, we all need each other.
Yeah.
Whether you need that person that beat you on a sale to fire you up to go out and make the next sale. So I think that's one of the unique things about living in Omaha, is we all kind of need each other and we help each other.
Well, we've had a first. The camera battery just died on us. We're still live. People could still hear us.
Whoa!
But we went from doing a podcast to doing radio as we're accustomed to. I've never had that happen.
Run out of time?
No, we're actually under. I'm not sure exactly what happened there. I apologize, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to cut the interview short for technical difficulties. This is the beauty of live radio. We talked about dealing with chaos. So it's only fitting that this would happen with Gary Sharp here.
So where do I rank on the guests that you've had?
Easily.
Like the guy that does siding, he was in here not too long ago. How do I rank against him?
I think you'd probably bottom 5%, somewhere in the lower range. I mean,
I appreciate that.
We probably won't
appreciate the honesty.
We probably won't have you back if that's what you're asking.
What do you think is your hottest take ever?
It's got to be the Mike Trout's a bust thing. But I'm listen.
We're coming up
hold
on
on,
a year, by the way.
Hold on. I prepared because I knew you were. My wife goes, "Why would you have Gary?" And I said, "Because Gary's going to ask me questions." And she goes, "Well, what do you think he's going to ask you?" And I said, "Well, he's definitely going to bring up the Mike Trout thing because that's his go-to when I'm in the room. So I'm going to be prepared for this." You have to put it in context. What I've noticed a lot is a lot of people don't listen to context of things. I said, did Mike Trout set the bar too high for himself early in his career? And the fact that he hasn't delivered on what his expectations were when he started breaking records, could that make him a bust? And then John Schreiner came back and told me I was an idiot. So then I just threw it on the internet and let everybody run with it. So context is important.
That's a smart play. So let me ask you another question.
Sure.
Because you have a very good insight into how this works, because you have your hand in so many different things in radio. So from afar, before you technically won a contest.
I didn't win a contest. I was runner-up.
I said air quotes, but people can't see it on camera.
Camera dead. Should we just turn the camera on the computer? So should we do that?
No, we're good.
Okay.
People don't want to see our faces. So your opinion of sports talk radio in Omaha before you became a sports talk host to now that you are one.
It's not as easy as it looks.
Okay.
The one thing that I get asked probably multiple times a week is, how do I get into podcasting? How do I get into radio? Yeah. How much money can I expect to make? Back to your point earlier. And I tell people, don't plan on making $1 for the first year. You
better be living in your parents' basement.
The first 8 months of Top Fan Show, we didn't turn a profit. And a lot of people don't know this. We pay for our show. I don't know why I'm gesturing to the camera like it's on. We pay for our show from 6 to 8 p.m. and I handle the majority of the sales for that stuff. And there was a couple times that we had to write a check out of our own pocketbook to keep that thing afloat. Much different story now, but it's a little bit different when you do the sales and the show. But the thing that I've noticed about people that want to get into the industry, they think they could sit and listen to a podcast. They think they could sit and listen to a radio broadcast. I could do that because I disagree with so-and-so, and here's my opinion on this. What you don't think about is the 2 to 4 hours of prep you have to do before that to come up with the topics, the discussion, watching the games, being involved, what's going on social media, and trying to keep your finger on the pulse of everything that's going on and hitting all those targets at the same time. I think a lot of people think they enjoy, they would enjoy it, and I would feel comfortable in saying it's probably 2 to 3% of people that have asked me how to get started that could have still done it. So it's more time consuming than I think most people understand.
So you also get the opportunity to dabble in both live radio and podcasting.
Yeah.
Favorite?
I enjoy the structure of radio, which I think most people that go from radio to podcasting don't. I like the fact that there's built-in breaks and that it's almost like a race against yourself where you've got to get your takes in. You've got to argue with the person you're having a conversation with. You mentioned Damon throwing his keys at you. My dad texted me the other night, who my dad legitimately thought the Colts were still in Baltimore until like 2 years ago. My dad's not a sports fan at all, but he texted me. He's like, "Man, you and that guy really don't like each other, do you?" And Schreiner and I have such a good working relationship, which is crazy because before we did radio together, we'd only done a handful of Creighton softball games. And we've got such a good working relationship. We'll yell at each other and then we'll fist bump afterwards. And I'm sure you can relate to that to some degree.
Well, you know what, that's a great observation by your dad because, not all of our businesses is create debate.
Sure.
I think
it's just better when there's some.
I think the create debate shows on television have sometimes impacted for the worst radio. But you're right. You have to handle it where that's the one thing, going back to Damon, that we would get into some deep heated arguments, but they weren't arguments. They were discussions, and we both had a point, and maybe we were saying the same thing, and we were button heads, but we have so much respect for each other that, you know what, you have your opinion, I have my opinion, you're either right or wrong, and we move on. And it doesn't affect like our relationship, like we're not all of a sudden fighting. But I can see how that's perception sometimes. But I think
it's because we're passionate about what we're talking about.
I think that's healthy for what we do in this business, and that is a talk show, because your dad reacted. I'm sure there's other people that reacted. Either they were picking a side, or they're like, whoa, okay. But you're right. The passion is the biggest thing.
What is something that people, callers, listeners, people that are not in the media do to interact with the media that irritates you? Do you have anything? Is there a pet peeve that you have?
Talk about? I hate the word take.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
okay.
I hate the word take.
Okay.
Like people will call up and say, I got a take. You know what? You have an opinion.
Yeah, which is why Connor Happer doesn't. I have an opinion segment.
You know what? Because, this is the Jim Rome. Like, there's a lot of people that have greatly influenced our business, whether it be Mike the Mad Dog back in the day, whether it be Jim Rome, which, Jim Rome for the longest time was extremely popular in Omaha. And so that became, everybody had a take. You got to have a take.
Yeah.
Have a take, don't
suck. It's a Mike Thompson-ism.
Yes. And it's a great adage, but, people just had a take. They like to hear themselves talk instead of adding to the show.
So,
but I think one other thing in our business, I think callers, which are great, I think have less of an influence nowadays.
So that's what I was about to caveat what you said, because mine is, I can't stand the phone rings. Somebody comes on the phone, yells at Dan Campion, who's the producer of After Hours, and Dan always follows it up. Well, would you like to come on the air?
They say no.
And they say no. Why would you call if you don't want to defend your take? We had a caller one time. It was during the Frost transition, and I said that I would really like Chris Kleiman to get a phone call.
Okay.
And the phone lights up, and this guy comes on, and he's just berating Dan on the phone, and Dan just throws him on the air. And he's like, I want you to tell me that you think the answer is to Nebraska's problems is the head coach at Kansas State. I want you to say that out loud. And I said, I'm going to go on a limb here and say, you don't know anything about Chris Kleiman. He goes, it doesn't matter what I know. And I said, I challenge you, do some homework, research Chris Kleiman tomorrow. And if you still feel the same way, call tomorrow night. We got to the end of the show, and I can't remember the gentleman's name. I said, I'm going to assume that he either didn't do the research, and the phone lights up. Hey, I'm just calling back in to let you know, man, we should probably go get that guy at Kansas State. I did some research on him. But it's one of those things, like, we want our listeners to be passionate, but we want you to be informed too. If you're going to call and tell us we're wrong, be ready for a debate. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is like, hey, I'd rather sound right than be right.
I think 1620 is very lucky because we have callers that enhance the show instead of like derail the show.
Sure.
But people that like just to call up, and I think we've all done it. Maybe we were younger. We called, you might have called USC back in the day.
I did a couple times, actually.
I know I called back in where I grew up in suburban Des Moines. WHO is a 50,000 water. That's the home of the Hawkeyes. And Jim Zabel, who kind of got me excited about getting into this business when I was a young kid. I remember calling up, and, you're nervous, but you kind of also want to just hear your voice.
Yeah.
And I think that bugs the hell out of me when I hear other shows and they just put callers on. They don't add anything to your show. So I think that's one of the advantages of being a 1620. Now, I'm not saying we have all great callers, but a majority of the callers actually enhance the show instead of derail it and all of a sudden take you another place where you're not going.
What is there a Super Bowl for you? Is there something you haven't done? If I could do this, it'd probably be the crowning achievement of my career. Is there something? I mean, you and Damon won a couple of awards.
You know what? Probably not anything I can think about. From the sports talk standpoint, it would be great to be on Radio Row at the Super Bowl, or something like that. Or Creighton's in the Final Four, and we're on Radio Row at the national championships. Maybe something like that. From the standpoint of play-by-play, I've been lucky enough. I think I've seen almost everything in the college world. Have broadcast championships. Have been around them. Have been with firsts of, going to. This past year with Omaha, going to the NCAA tournament for the first time. So in terms of a show, maybe the Super Bowl, being on Radio Row.
We didn't talk much about that. Obviously, your relationship with Omaha basketball. What is like when you see that moment happen and they finally make it to the dance? What was that moment like for you personally?
I thought a lot about the people that that have played at Omaha since I've been doing the games and who have coached at Omaha, and how everybody has grinded to try and get to that moment to experience it. And this group had the magic and the coaching to navigate the path to get to the cusp of winning and what they did and have an incredible season like we had with the regular season and the postseason. It was pretty emotional. I mean, I've been doing it for 12 years, and we've come close a couple of times, and finally this year to break through with a team that at one point was 3-9.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, this is going to be another typical Omaha season where we're going to come up short. And I'm going to start to wonder, man, the guy that's in charge, Chris Crutchfield, is really, really good. Why can't we get this going in year number 3? But, you know, when you're, and you kind of know this with some of the play-by-play you do.
Yeah.
When you're around teams, and especially basketball where the roster is smaller, you get to know them and you become part of the family. And so that's kind of the uniqueness of what happened this past year is I'm part of the Omaha men's basketball family, and you know the players' wives, and you know you get to know the coaches' wives, excuse me, and you get to know the players' families. So it was a hell of a moment. It was great for the university. It's the greatest athletic accomplishment Omaha has ever had. And now you get kind of greedy, and you're like, well, Crutch,
are you staying?
Can we do it again next year?
Yeah, for sure. And I listen, I think it's best for that university if expectations start to rise. It's better for everybody. We've talked about a ton today, man. I really appreciate this. Thanks for everybody that stuck around after the camera went off.
You ought to see what we're doing to the camera right now.
Gary
you
just
will
took
not believe it.
Gary just took his pants off. It got weird in here.
Oh, it's warm in here. It's like 85.
Hey, man, I appreciate you doing this
Thank
with
you.
us today. I appreciate
Thank you. You know, I'm a big fan
of the Spotlight Omaha podcast, or me in general.
You know what? So I watch the Spotlight and Omaha podcast. Not all of them, but like people that I know, I will watch, because sometimes people sitting in this chair are a little bit uncomfortable. You know, you're asking good questions, and they don't know where to look, and they don't know how to sit. So, but yes, and of course the stuff you do with After Hours and the play-by-play.
Well, thanks for joining us here on the Spotlight Omaha
Creighton
podcast. You giant Creighton fan, Gary Sharp. People forget.
No. So here, can I?
Yeah. Okay.
So people think just because I'm a Nebraska guy, I don't like Creighton. There are quite a few people that either coach at Creighton or work in the athletic department that I am big fans of. So I support them, and I want them to do well. I probably say it this way: winning or losing doesn't ruin my day. I'm not out to like, hey man, I hope Creighton loses. I like to see people that I like do well, and people that I do like and know at Creighton have done really well. So I'm happy for them.
That's Gary Sharp. You can catch him 6 to 10 a.m. on 1620 The Zone. Also on UNO men's basketball broadcasts. Yes. I'm sure he'll probably be somewhere around the College World Series in the next few weeks. So
pull this leg into place, jingle bells.
This has been the Spotlight Omaha podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing and Pyramid Contractors. Thanks for sticking around. Sorry you didn't have to look at Gary Sharp's ugly face too long, but thanks for being here today anyway. Appreciate you. We'll see you in the morning, 11 a.m. Spotlight Omaha podcast.